Hello and welcome to today's Career Month webinar program. My name is Adam Sylvain and I work with the Alumni Career Development Team here at the University of Chicago in Hyde Park. I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar entitled How to Join a Nonprofit Board and Why You Should Consider It. Today we will hear from Jasmine Kwong. We're hoping for two additional panelists to be joining us momentarily, but Jasmine will start our conversation. I'm going to keep my own introductions very short and allow Jasmine to share more about herself and to kick off our discussion. So without further ado, let's go ahead and begin. Thank you, Jasmine, for joining us.
Hi, everybody. So like Adam said, my name is Jasmine Kwong, and I'm currently Associate Director of Field Lab Services and Programs at the Center for Decision Research within Chicago Booth. What that means is that we have a lab on campus as well as downtown, and also partner with other organizations to do research in other locations. So I manage the downtown lab and our offsite locations. And then in terms of the boards that I sit on, I volunteer with the Museum of Contemporary Photography as Vice President on their Museum Council, which is basically an auxiliary board. And then also volunteer for Kids in Danger on their gala committee. And then I've also volunteered for several other organizations in the arts and humanities, if we want to cover that later.
Great, thank you. So with that introduction from Jasmine, I want to go ahead and launch a poll, and we're going to just get a little bit of information about those joining us today. So first question that we'd like to ask, what prompted your interest in today's webinar topic? So it could be that you are actively thinking about joining a nonprofit board, something maybe you've considered but haven't explored in depth. Maybe you have prior board service experience that you want to learn how to leverage in your professional career, or perhaps you have a board service opportunity that you would like to learn how to market well. So please go ahead and register your response. I'll give a few more seconds for folks to choose one of those options, and then I'll share them out. All right, so it looks like we have a total of 32% that are thinking about joining a nonprofit board, 47% that might consider joining a board and are looking for more information, 19% that want to learn how to leverage their prior board experience, and 3% that have may have a board service opportunity that they are looking to market. So we have one more question here. So the next poll question is, which option best describes where you are currently? So looking to kind of get some information about where folks are in their career, whether you are would classify yourself as an early career professional, less than 10 years post-graduation, mid-career, 10 to 20 years post-graduation, a senior level professional, more than 20 years, or perhaps you're a current student. We do always have a few of those joining us as well. So please do let us know. Give a few more seconds, and then I'll share out those results as well. All right, so here it looks like we have the majority, 56%, that are senior level, more than 20 years post-graduation, 32% that are in that mid-career range, 10 to 20 years, an additional 13% less than 10 years post-graduation, and no students with us. So hopefully that's helpful for you, Jasmine, as we move forward with some of our discussion. So the first question, and actually we're going to skip this one. This was actually one for our other one of our other panelists who's going to be joining us shortly, we hope. But let's begin, Jasmine, with what made you decide to join a nonprofit board?
Well, so Sean just joined. Can he go ahead and introduce himself?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, thank you. Sean, do you want to join us via webcam? Oh, there you are. Great. I can see you now. Awesome. Glad that you were able to join us. Thanks so much. Yeah, let's go ahead and let Sean introduce himself. All you've missed so far, Sean, is Jasmine just shared a bit about who she is, where she works currently, and what board service opportunities she's participated in. If you could maybe start us off there.
Yeah, sure. So I graduated Booth in '09 and the college in '03. And I I've been doing a lot of tech stuff. I'm running a insurance technology company called Kin Insurance that uses a lot of tech and big data to provide insurance to buildings, mainly single-family homes that are in climate-impacted areas of the country where it can be hard to get insurance, especially cost-effective insurance that's easy to use. Before that, I had another company that I sold. It was also a fintech company. It was called Fee Fighters, and I sold that to Groupon in 2012. And before that, I had another company. Before that, I was at BCG, and I did a little bit of time at a VC firm. And I'm on one nonprofit board. It's the Axion USA board. Axion is international. They do a lot of stuff, but it's usually around lending and availability of credit for small businesses. And that's, the definition of what's a small business is pretty different in some of the countries where they operate. In Mexico is a big country of theirs. And, those are really, really, really small enterprises. And then the board that I'm on is actually the board for the U.S. operations, where the businesses are somewhat larger, but they're in, neighborhoods that are historically conceived of as bad, and where it's hard to get loans from the big banks. I've been doing that, probably 4 years now, and I originally got on that board. The company was, it's not a company. The organization was going through some tech and distribution challenges where they thought I could help them. And one of the other members of the board was someone that I went to the college with and also worked with at BCG. And he sort of looped me into it.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. Let's,
That answered
oh,
the
sorry,
first.
go ahead, Jasmine.
No, I said Sean just answered the first question, which is great.
Yeah, perfect. So we'll move on to maybe starting with you, Jasmine. How did you get involved with your organization, and what was that process like?
Yeah, so I decided to join a nonprofit board, and in particular with the Museum of Contemporary Photography, because I had been in research administration for a few years, and my heart was calling me to the arts. And so I was looking to make a career move to do development in the arts. So then I started to volunteer in relevant organizations to gain experience and to meet people, basically to network. And similar to Sean, I also knew someone who was already volunteering on the museum council. He was working at the University of Chicago at the time, I want to say in the alumni office, and then also doing his MBA part-time like I was. So that's kind of how I got connected to the museum.
Great, thank you. And Sean, I know you shared a bit already about how you kind of got involved with the organization. Anything more to add in terms of how that process began for you?
Yeah, so it began with Brad, who is the friend of mine, reaching out and asking if it was something I was interested in talking about. And I got coffee with him, and then he introduced me to the CEO of the organization, Gina, and I was she is based in New York. The organization is sort of throughout the country, and so I just arranged, on my next trip to New York to drop by their offices and chat with her. And from there, she wanted to socialize me with some of the other board members, so I had phone calls with them, and that was pretty much it. It was basically like interviewing for a job. It took probably 2 months to sort of go through all those steps of getting added to the board.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, that reminds me, I also did a little interview with the director of development at the museum who was in charge of the group.
Great. Since both of you had those kinds of meetings, maybe tacking on a follow-up to that previous question, um, what did that preliminary conversation look like? Were there specific questions that you asked or that were asked of you that would be helpful to share?
For me, it was the museum council was just being sort of rebuilt. So they just wanted to make sure that that I was interested, wanted to hear a little bit more about why I was interested in joining. And I pretty much sure he said in his words that he just wanted to make sure I wasn't crazy. You know, you're going to be working as a group, right? So you want to make sure that there is some rapport and that we could work together. So it was pretty general, a very casual conversation, it felt like.
Great. Maureen, I saw you're just joined us. Thanks so much. Glad to have you here. Let's break from the question that we're on now, just to let you, Maureen, to share a bit about yourself and the your current work and the work that you're involved in and board service opportunities.
Sorry. It was kind of noisy here. Can you repeat that?
Sure. Yeah, I think maybe there's a little bit of feedback. I mean, do you want to maybe call in, Maureen, via the telephone line? I think there's some feedback. We'll wait for you to join via phone. Sean, can you share a bit about what the conversation was like in those meetings that you had, first with your college classmate and then in New York?
Yeah, they wanted to know, for the guys who didn't know me, there was the normal sort of introduction questions, and we spent some time chatting through the challenges that they were facing and sort of mapping my experience to those challenges. In this case, they were looking for expertise on a pretty specific topic, and so we spent a lot of time talking about that topic, which was, they
Okay. I just want to let you. I'm here now on audio. So
Great, awesome. Yeah, we can hear you, Maureen. Thank you for making that switch, and we'll get back to you in just a moment.
okay.
So this org, they were trying to make their loans easier to sign up for by using technology and some big data to automate what had previously been a pretty manual process, because they were running into issues where the customers would sign up for really sort of usurious loans with other providers, because it was faster. And when a small business needs money, they sometimes need it like right away. And we were trying to figure out ways to basically be more efficient at delivering the product of this nonprofit. And so we spent a lot of time really digging into the details of how they did underwriting, what data sources they used, and what their technology stack was like. So we did a little bit of a diagnosis. I wanted to make sure that my experience would be useful to them.
Great. Thanks, Sean. Maureen, let's go back to you. And the first question that I asked was really just to have you introduce yourself, the work that you're doing now, and what board service opportunities you've participated in the past. I think you might have muted your phone line. All right, well, we'll come back to you, Maureen. Let us know again when you rejoin us.
Can you hear me now?
Oh,
we
can.
Hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you. Did you hear my question, Maureen? Just an introduction of yourself, the work that you're doing, and what board service opportunities you've participated in. Did you hear my question, Maureen?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello?
Yeah,
Yes.
we can.
Okay. So
we can hear you.
I said that so Maureen Dunn, I received my bachelor's and master's degree from University of Chicago back in 1998. And actually, I started my career in more nonprofit and academic settings, but in the last decade or so, I've co-founded or advised several venture-backed technology companies, mostly in the education and technology space. And then in terms of nonprofit boards I've been on, I actually started my nonprofit board service while I was a student at Enriches, Chicago. So it goes back many years. And current boards, I don't know, Adam, if you have that slide, if you want to pull up that. I put together that slide just because when I was, kind of reflecting on the different boards I'm on, I realized how different some of them were. And I think when we think about nonprofit board service, we only think about the sort of traditional 501c3, which most of the opportunities will be. But I don't know if you have that slide, if that would make sense to pull up.
Yep, it's up now. Yeah, actually, if you
Okay.
are able to see that and want to talk through that a little bit more.
Yeah. Okay. So so there's the more traditional 501c3. So for instance, right now I'm on a board of directors on the Mental Health Association of Greater Chicago. Previously, I was on several different boards in the autism space and in the education space. One I was on that's located in the Bay Area, Community Resources for Science. But then I've also on the board of several private-public partnerships. One is the Downers Grove Economic Development Corporation, and they're a 501c6, and there's others that are 501c4, and the difference, the 501c6, there's a lot of some of the chambers have that category, and the difference is that they're allowed to promote some business interests as well and influence policy, which a traditional, obviously, 501c3 is not able to do. And then more recently, I was elected as a college trustee at the College of DuPage. So obviously, the process on getting on that board is a very different one, and I can talk a little bit about that later on. And then also, if you have your own idea and there's not really an organization that existing organization that really fits, I started a program called the Transition to Success Project, which offers grants and what we call transition grants and scholarships to teenagers on the autism spectrum, and it starts in high school, and then the program and the funding follows them to the apprenticeship or college of their choice. And so when I first started that, lots a lot of the local Rotary clubs had helped raise funds for us, and it was a nonprofit, unincorporated. So it was considered an unincorporated nonprofit. We got a certificate from the county as an assumed name, and then we looked for a larger umbrella 501c3 organization that would serve as our fiscal sponsor, and then are now in the process of branching off from that and getting our own 501c3. So I'm also on the board of Access to Care, which is also a public-private partnership. I recently was asked to join an advisory board governance council of Good Samaritan Hospitals, and then I'm also on a number of boards that technically are for profit, but they're public benefit corporations with a large social impact mission, and they're technology social enterprises.
Thank you, Maureen. That background is really helpful, and these distinctions between different board service opportunities. And I think that's a great segue into one of the questions that we tackled before you joined us, Maureen, was kind of what made you decide to join nonprofit boards. Maybe you can talk about a couple of the opportunities that you've been engaged in, and kind of how that decision process looked for you.
Sure. I think in my case, again, even when I was a student at U of C, I just felt, as much as I enjoyed, the research I was involved in my classes, I just always felt this really strong need to contribute to making progress, being part of a team, and that was taking some sort of action, right? However big or small, just taking some action, making progress on the issues I cared most about. And so even back then, I was on the board of some state autism related organizations. In, I would say, the last 10, 15 years, I tended to look for opportunities to engage and make progress on issues that I felt I in my professional life, there would be some overlap, but it's a different experience joining a board of like-minded people and trying to work on a particular issue. And so I think you're probably going to talk a little bit later about the process, what it's like to actually how you reach out, how you actually end up, the process of actually joining a board. So I won't get into that part right now.
Great, thank you, Maureen. Yeah, so let's go ahead and skip to the question that we had left off with Sean and Jasmine. Jasmine, if you want to start us off here and just share what you do as a board member and maybe the variety that you've seen in different board roles.
Sure. I think the two most basic functions for every board member are to advocate and to fundraise. So advocate, I think, in that you get to share your cause, that you do it. So like today. And then fundraise, pretty basic. Every organization needs money. So I think are kind of the basics related, and then it's all related to those two is like fundraising, so bringing supporters to the organization, which is both advocacy and fundraising. And then specifically my role based on why I wanted to join these organizations in the first place is wanting to get experience in development and fundraising. And so I specialize in those things, and in particular in events, organizing fundraisers. In terms of the variety of board roles, I think the general ones are sort of, there's always a chair or a president, then there's like a vice president or a chair, there's a secretary often, and then a treasurer. And then as I mentioned, I'm the one who kind of does the special events, so there's kind of like a gala chair or committee. And then more and helping out, organizations are very open to also what you want. It's dependent on your skills and interest. So I think that about covers it for me.
Great, thanks, Jasmine. Sean, can you share a bit about more about your role, and then what maybe some of the variety that you've seen in other board roles?
Yeah, I mean, the board that I am on, fundraising isn't a big part of it. They're really good. The staff of the nonprofit is really good at raising money, and ours is more like a governance and administrative and advice role. So one way that you can participate on a board is there are sometimes like subcommittees. So I've been on like a technology subcommittee. I've been on an audit subcommittee. There've been a couple of other ones where, some of them are more fun than others. Everyone always wanted to be on like the strategy committee, and no one wanted to be on the audit committee, for example. And but you sort of take turns being on the committee and mix up the fun ones, the boring ones. Yeah, and like there was a lot. At times I've gotten involved in a lot of activities outside of the board meeting, either providing advice to the CEO of the organization, or even working on projects, or like being a sounding board, or auditing kind of the work that some of the little lower level people at the group were doing, and that's always pretty fun, because you get more into the details and get to use. For me, it was cool because I get to use the the skills that I use every day, but in like a different context.
Great, thanks. Maureen, can you share about maybe just digging into one of the board memberships that you've been a part of, what that has looked like for you, what your role is in that?
Sure. Sure. I would say, for all of them, what's been constant is that, obviously there's the basic duties, right? There's the board meetings you need to show up at, and for some organizations that's once a quarter, other organizations it might be once a month. And there's a fiduciary responsibility to the organization. So understanding their financial position, being able to read the accounting statements. But I would say, I agree with Sean about the committee work. I mean, in my experience, actually, most of the actual work that gets done on boards are in the committees. I think the committee work, in my experience, is a much larger commitment in a way, in the sense that there's, if you could be on the fundraising committee. I'm the Mental Health Association of Greater Chicago. There's also an opportunity to be creative. They let me create a new committee, a public policy committee, involved very heavily in technology with them. And so I think, I think in general, in terms of fundraising, I mean, most of the organizations I've been involved in, there's not necessarily a requirement the board members give. Some there are, but most there aren't. But I think there's an expectation that one way or another you're advocating for the mission. There's going to be fundraising events. You're bringing in your network. You're helping maybe organize those events as well.
Great, thank you. Moving on to our next question, and let's start with Sean on this one. How has being on a nonprofit board impacted other areas of your professional life?
It's good in this case because it was related to the field that I'm in. They're both financial technology related. It's been, I've learned some stuff from my participation in that board that has been useful to me. The other area where I've helped, is it's like, I mean, it sounds cool on like the LinkedIn profile or the resume, and that doesn't hurt. And it's also been useful from a network perspective because it brought me into contact with a bunch of people that weren't necessarily in my orbit before. The mission and the prestige of this organization is really significant, and so being associated with it has really benefited me from just being a cool thing that people respect.
Great, thanks, Sean. Jasmine, can you respond as well to how your board service has impacted your professional life?
Yeah, so I mentioned in my introduction or earlier on in the conversation that I, in particular, wanted to get some experience and to meet the people who would help me transition from a research administration position into the arts world. And so it did help me get my previous job as assistant director of development at SkyArt. And I know we'll go over this in a little bit, but just being able to develop skills that are really transferable. So we've mentioned fundraising, event planning, more general leadership skills, community building and such, that I think really does help with professional life in general. I think it complements my day job. I'm back in social science and research now. So being in the arts and humanities, I think balances out other interests. And so I feel in general that volunteering on a nonprofit board makes my life more rich and meaningful.
Great, thanks. Maureen, can you share the impact of your board service on your professional life?
Sure, I'll try to be brief. I get asked that question a lot, and I kind of, in my head anyway, boil it down to two words: combinatorial mathematics, in the sense that it's not that it's influenced one area or another area. It's suddenly I have this network in so many different areas, so many different industries, and then yet there's ways in which all these different skill sets, all these different people that I've come to know, can have come together, in some cases to do other things, right? Or do projects, or just it's informed my perspective So I know people in technology and in venture capital world, in education and healthcare and autism and in public policy and public, it's suddenly just everything else I've been doing professionally, I think also then, became informed by some of the work I've been doing in the nonprofit. And then also just like with the entrepreneurs I advise, most of the companies even I'm involved in, they tend to be in the healthcare and education space. And, it was important for me to be always, having my boots on the ground. I kind of like to think of it in terms of just being really, really involved at the community level, really understanding what the problems are in some of these spaces. And because ultimately, even the companies I'm involved in, they're mission driven, they're about solving problems. And I think, there's so many ways it's hard for me to even articulate that you just learn new perspectives, and you're interacting with people from different industries that can also inform those perspectives. And then, you're also just learning all the skill sets that have already been mentioned, negotiation skills, leadership skills, fundraising skills. So I think, and they're also, to me, being on a nonprofit board, there's a lot of skills you learn that are transferable in other industries, in even in business, right? Just because there's some of the same skill sets that are needed.
Great, thank you. I think that's going to be a good segue. I know we have a slide here that you had shared, Maureen, that mentioned some of those cross-training and transferable skills that you can get through board membership. Did you want to, I know you mentioned several of these: fundraising, leadership, negotiation. Any others from this list that you want to highlight or elaborate on?
Yeah. I mean, I think like even just, having experience evaluating a CEO, right? And potentially hiring a CEO and firing a CEO, that kind of oversight, right? That's, now I'm on the board of a college, and we just went through that process some months ago, hiring a new president. And it was just, it was really helpful for me anyway, having been on so many boards before where I had, it wasn't a college, but just going through that process, and then also just having an understanding and getting better over time of what, of what good board governance looks like. I think that's just tremendously helpful, and also, ideally, you're part of a board with open-minded. The other board members are open-minded, and there's opportunities to be creative, and affect real change, and maybe introduce some new initiatives. So I tend to look for boards that's possible. I don't like to be involved in the type of boards where the other members maybe aren't quite as enthusiastic, right? Or it's just about a resume or not whatnot. But but yeah, I think there's lots of skills that translate over into other areas of life.
Great, thank you. Looking at this list, Sean, are there any skills in particular that you think have been strengthened from your board participation?
Yeah, I mean, it was a cool experience for me because I have always had the experience of being a CEO that has to report to a board. And it was really interesting for me to experience that from the other direction. And it gave me a useful perspective on, how I could run my board meetings better. And what the point of view was of my board members. So yeah, that was really a surprising benefit of it.
Thanks, Jasmine. Any skills in particular that you found strengthened through your participation?
I think this about covers it. It's really, I think especially with the museum contemporary photography being motion above all the other ones, it's everything. You get to do whatever you get as part of it as much as you put in, basically.
Awesome, thanks. So what tips might you have for someone interested in joining a board? And I know we have a question come in, and we'll have a little bit more time for Q&A towards the end, but I want to wrap in a question here because somebody had asked, if you don't have a personal connection, what are your tips in that case for joining a board? I imagine, personal networks are powerful, but how do you make that happen, maybe within an existing network, or if you don't have that prior connection? Jasmine, do you want to start us on that question?
Yeah, it definitely helped to have that connection, but it wasn't even that I needed that connection to be connected to the museum as much as there was someone there trying to recruit me, if that makes sense. So I think the first step would be to start letting people know that that's what you want to do. And then if you sort of announce it enough and you're talking to people, someone will be like, hey, that's what you're interested in, I can loop you into here. So there's that. And then figure out what you are interested in and find a way to get involved. It's a little bit of cold calling. I think a lot of organizations would be happy to talk to you if you are interested and want to give your time and talent and money, right? So that's kind of how I got involved with some of the organizations for CERT, just reaching out to someone at the organization, either staff member or board member, and say, hey, I'm interested in this. Can I give you my time and money? Right? So a lot of people are willing to listen to that. Otherwise, a couple of resources I've shared more with Adam, who will share with the group later in the follow-up. But if you're kind of like shopping, you don't really know what you want to be involved with, Chicago Cares is a nonprofit that hosts an annual event called Find Your Cause. It's an event in the fall. We just missed it this year, but there are other events like this where it's basically like a fair where nonprofits come and present who they are, what kind of volunteers you're looking for, and then you can learn about them and then sign up as you're interested. And then gotta plug the Chicago Booths on Board conference. It's their 7th annual conference this year, happening April 3rd. Registration will open at the end of January. And of course, you can find your cause, and then no matter where you are sort of in your nonprofit board service journey, there is kind of something for everybody. It's open to everyone, but of course, a lot of alumni and students, faculty are coming to this. So it's a great networking and learning opportunity.
Great, thank you, Jasmine. And if anybody's not diligently taking notes, I will certainly send out in the post-event email today links to those resources that Jasmine mentioned. Maureen, can you share a bit on this question as well, advice for making inroads and expressing interest in joining a board?
Sure, absolutely. I think even without a large network, I think there's always opportunities to serve. There's always opportunities to serve on boards, especially people that have a genuine passion or story that's motivated them to be involved in that space. Or maybe, if you have skills that organization could really benefit from, that they don't have those skills on the board, whether they're, engineering skills or design skills or marketing skills, or if you have a family member in that space. And I think there's different ways you can learn about opportunities. There's even, LinkedIn now. I mean, there's a lot of organizations that start advertising volunteer board positions on LinkedIn, or when they're, when they're starting to expand their board. Bridgespan also, you can search through, nonprofit board service opportunities on Bridgespan. So there's organizations that do now advertise when they are looking for new board members. And then if there's an organization that maybe is not advertising for new boards, but it's just an organization you're really passionate about, I mean, I would suggest just starting out, getting more involved, going to some of their events, getting to know the other board members, getting to know the executive director, or maybe reaching out over email or LinkedIn to either the board chair or the executive director prior to an event, and trying to meet and just explain, your story and why you'd really want to be more involved. And I think most of the time, I think that would, that will lead to some meetings to just, where you get to know each other and see if it's a good fit.
Great, thank you, Maureen. Sean, anything to add to this question before we move on? I'll probably do one more question and then move into Q&A.
I don't have anything to add.
Okay, great. So we're gonna talk through our last question here, which what has been the most challenging experience for you in being on a board? And Sean, maybe you can start us off on that one.
Just finding the time for it. There's a lot always going on, and there are only so many hours in the day. So I found, just finding the time to be the toughest thing.
Actually, if I can tack on to that question, we did have a question come in from one of our attendees on if you're somebody who travels frequently for work, and it sounds like Sean, you travel for your work at various points. Does that complicate things or make things more difficult for board membership? And how do you maybe negotiate that if you're not physically in a place all the time?
No, it didn't. In some ways, it makes it easier because the organization that I'm on the board of is a national organization, and so the fact that I'm in, New York pretty frequently, where they're based, and I'm in Chicago pretty frequently, where they have a big organization, and also make my way to California and Denver, where they have orgs, has been beneficial. But I have had to miss board meetings because I had, conflicting work, commitments, like, for example, my own board meetings, or, I had a trip for something that was important that I couldn't move and wasn't able to make the board meeting. So, yeah, the logistics can be hard.
Thanks, Sean. Jasmine, what's been the most challenging experience for you?
My most challenging experience is trying to work with people who are not engaged. I absolutely understand, though, that like time is a factor, but beyond that, board members who sign up and then don't come to meetings, don't pay their dues, and things like this. Being on the executive team, we're sort of, the president and I and the other couple of people on the executive team are sort of in charge of making sure people show up and things like this, and it's just really frustrating. But over the years and many organizations that I'm part of, I've come to learn that maybe that's just how it is. There are always going to be people who sign up and then can't do what they mean to do, and that I have to grow up and let it go.
Thank you. Maureen, what have you found to be the most challenging aspect of your board service?
Yeah, so actually I'll briefly talk about two things. I mean, one I think is if you're, when you've served on enough boards, at some point you're going to deal with some pretty difficult personalities, right? And it's not always a bad thing because, I think, honestly, I think I've learned a lot. You learn a lot about just that's a skill set too, right? Being able to deal with and communicate with difficult personalities. But I'd say the most, I'm going to change the word from challenging to frustrating. Probably the most frustrating experience I've had, and this was many years ago, but I was on a board and I really truly believed in the mission, but it just was a very disappointing experience because I felt like, and this wasn't one or two people, I felt like maybe most of the people there were only there because they wanted to put it on their resume. And it was just, I understand everybody's like ridiculously busy and we have so many other things going on, but I would show up to these meetings and they'd be 3 hour, at least minimum 3 hour board meetings, and I felt like so much, even in the 3 hours that we've all committed to and we're all there, I felt like there was so much that could get accomplished, and yet there would be almost like a purposeful way of trying to shift the conversation into, when I bring up, hey, well, we talked about doing putting more effort into this initiative or driving the organization forward and scaling it and doing, applying for this grant or doing this and that. Well, let's have a conversation about that. It would turn into, well, we can't really do that because, well, we need to actually talk about what the meaning of neighborhood is to begin with. And, then that would turn into like another 2-hour conversation about, what's the definition of neighborhood? and to me, it was like, well, that's not really why I'm here. We could have that conversation, but I guess what was challenging was just, it wasn't a board where there was people that really were there to they weren't fully there is I guess the way, and there's limited, everyone has limited time, but I think it's important to join a board where everyone is fully present during the time periods that we're committed to and doing real, trying to move the organization forward.
Great, thank you. I don't want to end with a question about challenges, so we'll end with the next question, which is, what is a common misconception that people might have about nonprofit board service? And then we'll open up for maybe just a couple of questions at the end here. Maureen, do you want to lead us off on a misconception maybe that you had prior to joining or that you've heard expressed?
Sure. I mean, I think in general, a lot of people assume that most nonprofit boards tend to only attract people from the nonprofit sector and maybe don't realize just the kind of diverse leadership that actually serves on these boards. There's former CEOs of companies, there's people, the CPAs, there's just a very diverse backgrounds, diverse skill sets. You get to, again, one of the big, I think, like we talked about, one of the big upsides of joining a board, even professionally, is you just get to network and get to know people outside your industry and from very different professions. And there's a lot of people from finance and business, the business world. And I think some people sometimes assume it's only people from the nonprofit sector that are on these boards.
Great, thanks. Jasmine, any misconceptions that you had prior to joining or that you've heard expressed, or would you echo kind of what?
To add here.
That's okay. Sean, anything to add, or should we move into Q&A? All right,
no,
awesome. Well, let's end with a question or two. We have an attendee who expressed concern about the fact that there are some of those board service opportunities that do have dues or a fundraising obligation. So if you're somebody who is maybe younger in your career and might not have as much to give an organization, any advice on whether it's better to sort of hold off until you're more financially secure, or ways that you can contribute right away or kind of navigate that financial hurdle? Jasmine, anything to share there?
Yeah, so first of all, I've actually not been on these big boards, but I feel like I'm kind of in transition mode right now. But I've always sort of been on either just as a volunteer and then got grandfathered into sort of a board, or I've been on junior boards or young professionals board, and those usually have a smaller give-get obligation. So for the boards that I've been in now and even previously, they were more achievable. So there's that, number one. Number two is there are other things that you can offer that's not just money, right? So I had mentioned time and talent before. So I think, and then related to that is like everything is negotiable. If you are a board member, and I've been on nonprofits where I helped manage the board members, where it's negotiable. You cannot pay the give-get just like everybody else. What can you actually give instead? So it's, I wouldn't say, I would say go for it. Don't wait. And then if one organization for some reason can't move on that, you'll find another cause that would be able to accommodate.
Great, thank you. Maureen or Sean, anything to add there? Otherwise, I think I have a related question that might be good to tag on here before the end.
I would just add that, if you're exploring possibly joining a board, that the board chair will be, generally speaking, very, very clear about the expectations. And there are some boards that there is an expectation of that each board member is either supposed to fund or bring in a certain amount yearly, right? Many do not have that criteria. Some do, but there's so many boards where it's you know, it's going to be that if that's not the way in which you think you can best contribute, focusing on skills, you know, I mean, as was just mentioned, like just I think that there's so many organizations that would love to have people on a board, you know, they won't have to contribute money, but if they're passionate about it and they're willing to do some work and contribute skills, that would be awesome.
Great, thank you. That actually dovetails perfectly with the question we'll end with, which comes from an attendee who asks, you know, how do you match your skills and interests with the many organizations that are, you know, in even Chicago, for instance? Is there a way to do that prior to, you know, reaching out and having a conversation, or does it really begin there? Maureen, let's start with you on that one.
Well, I think you could start learning about the organization. You could look at, you know, most organizations, their board of directors are listed online. You know, in their bios, you can kind of have an understanding of how diverse the skill sets already are on the board. I think that's helpful before you approach a conversation. And you know, I think that a lot there might be skills you have that you don't necessarily at first realize are significant to that organization. The only way to really find out it's a good match, I think, is to really reach out, have a meeting with either the board director or the board chairperson or the executive director and start that conversation. And but I think the initial research just about the organization and, you know, looking at the composition of the board could be a start.
Great, thanks. And anything to add to what Maureen shared, Sean or Jasmine?
I think if you have no idea what you want to do, that would be hard. So maybe the first step is just figuring out what you're interested in. So for me, like I have always been interested in photography, and so finding the Museum of Contemporary Photography was not difficult, especially then in addition to that when like I said, someone on the council said, hey, seems like you're interested. So that just made it even easier and faster. But I already knew about it. And then another organization that I started out as a volunteer was the Hyde Park Jazz Festival, right? Being on the U Chicago campus, just growing up with that festival and then getting to know one of the founders, chatting with her, and then getting involved that way. So for me, it was pretty organic. But hopefully you're starting off with knowing what you want to do, how you want to give, and then finding the cause shouldn't be too difficult.
Great. Well, thank you so much to Jasmine, Sean, and Maureen. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks for those who attended. Really appreciate your insights on this topic. We're now at the tail end of our Career Month programming, so we have one final event tomorrow at 12 Central Time. We hope you can all join us for a presentation from UChicago alumna and Wiser founder Kate Volzer on Mentoring 101, how to find mentors across generational gaps. You can visit our events page at careers.uchicagoalumni.org for a list of our upcoming programs. Take care, everyone, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks again, Jasmine, Sean, and Maureen.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.